bottom line.
Hello, and welcome to the Payments Podcast. I'm Owen McDonald, and I'll be your host today as we discuss evolving trends in digital payments, policy, and regulation. It's been said that the COVID-19 pandemic accelerated the digital transformation of payments by 10 years or more on the consumer side. It's cloudier in B2B, but things like AP automation and private B2B payments networks prove the advances B2B is making. And since things move much faster in Silicon Valley than on Capitol Hill, this tech modernization wave, powered by data and dollars, leaves public policy in a constant state of catching up, often to clamp down later. This has been true from crypto to buy now, pay later, and regulators are very keen on business payments involving complex terms and huge amounts, oftentimes moving cross-border. To walk us through the boardrooms and halls of power where U.S. policy decisions on digital payments get made and influenced, we're joined by a true insider. Jodie Kelley is CEO of Washington, D.C.-based trade advocacy group, the Electronic Transactions Association, or ETA. Jodie graduated from Harvard Law School and lived the life of an agency partner for a while. Then she gave it all up to use her skills differently as CEO of a trade group that foresaw today's digital economy in ways many others did not. Jodie Kelley, we're delighted to have you on the Payments Podcast.
Owen, it is so good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. So to get us started, Jodie, tell me a little bit about the Electronic Transactions Association, which began life in 1990 as the Bank Card Services Association. What is the mission of the ETA? Who do you represent? And what portion of your membership would you say is active in business payments specifically?
Yeah, so thanks. So ETA, as you say, came into being in 1990 before my time, and it's sort of amusing to think that it came into being as the Bank Card Association, because think how much has changed since then, and you see it in like who we are and what we do and who our members are. So as you noted, we're a trade association. That means we represent an industry, and the industry that we represent is payments, the most fabulous industry that actually very few policymakers and others even understand as an industry or have any idea about how it works. So we represent payments, and we represent the breadth of payments. So if you look at our membership, you'll see a little bit of everything. You'll see all the major card networks. You will see financial institutions on both the acquiring and the issuing side. You'll see all the processors. You'll see fintechs. You'll see software companies. It's a broad membership, but it reflects the state of the industry. This very complex industry that has evolved to bring new solutions to both consumers on the consumer side and to businesses on the business payment side. I don't know exactly what percentage of our membership is involved in business payments, but it's a lot. Most of the major players are participating in the B2B payment space, unsurprisingly, given the size of that space and the opportunity there. And then we have many, many players who are focused solely on delivering solutions from business to business payments.
Thank you for that. That was a great summary. And also, the ETA is seen as the voice of and the advocate for the payments industry in Washington, D.C., around the country, in Canada, which is something I think you did. You have a bird's eye view of what's now and what's next. So, Jodie, what are some of the major trends you see impacting B2B payments this year and next?
Yeah. So you're absolutely right that we spend a lot of time understanding the industry, what the trends are, because as we educate the industry, advocate for the industry, bring the industry together to do business, to do what we do well, we have to understand this industry. And it's evolving so fast, as you know, being in the middle of it. So the trends we're seeing in business payments, they're not surprising. Nothing I'm going to say is going to surprise you. What I think is most interesting about what we're seeing in business payments is companies just seizing the enormous opportunity that there is in this space. I remember when I first started, we had an event, and we had a speaker, and they were showing a slide deck, and they put up a slide on the addressable market in consumer to business payments and business to business payments. And I thought, wow, if I were in business, I'd want to be there. The addressable market is just enormous. And we're seeing, companies capitalize on that. So, it's taken some time. We went from 80% of business payments made in checks in around 2004 to just over 30% now. It took a while to get there, but a dramatic decline in checks and a dramatic acceleration in the use of digital payments, and all the trends that we're seeing more broadly in payments: automation, digitization, the rise of virtual cards, the rise of real-time rails, including FedNow, blockchain, AI, software, and payments being embedded in software. All of these we're seeing, being taken advantage of in the business payment side to deliver, better products, better experiences for both payors and payees. So tons of opportunity. And again, all these digitization trends, which are accelerating so quickly, we're seeing being leveraged in the business payments markets.
Agreed, for sure. And like you just said, there's a lot of opportunity for growth in B2B payments, and automation, digitization are making it easier and more efficient to run a business. That's good. On the flip side, what worries you, Jodie? What potential threats to business payments and finance are you monitoring on the horizon?
Yeah, so I'm a worrier by nature, so lots of things worry me. But I'll tell you one thing that worries me. One thing that worries me, and that I actually personally spend a lot of time on, is the ability of misguided public policy to really get in the way of this incredible innovation we're seeing. As you noted when you opened, policymakers are frequently scrambling to catch up. Technology moves so quickly, and policymakers, by and large, are not people who are steeped in technology, in payments, in financial services. And so policymakers are struggling to catch up. And even well-intentioned policymakers, if they get it wrong, there can be meaningful unintended consequences. And so making sure that policymakers are educated about the payment space, making sure that that all of us are looking around the corner and trying to anticipate where things could go off the rails and prevent that from happening, I think is critically important. This is an industry that just moves. And you cannot have, again, well-intentioned but misguided policy be the thing that gets in the way of that progress.
What's a couple of examples of that are really on your radar right now? I think you mentioned a couple, Illinois and AI. What do you have to say about what's going on there?
Yeah, and I think those are actually kind of good examples that illustrate what we were just talking about. And let me start by saying, here's the good thing about being in business payments. A lot of policymakers are much more focused on the consumer side. So the good news is business payments are directly in the crosshair. And particularly in a highly politicized environment, which we're in right now, policymakers are looking for headlines. And so, we've seen a bunch of them, capping overdraft fees, capping, it's an effort to kind of win over consumer sentiment. And so that's the happy news, right? That business payments aren't directly in the crosshairs. But here's the thing, all those technologies that we rattled off, those are being deployed both on the consumer and the business side. And, when policymakers get involved, it's easy for there to be knock-on consequences that can harm both. And so let's talk about those two things that you raised. So, in Illinois, there is a law that has been passed that we're working on now that does a few things, including it says interchange cannot be charged on the sales tax portion of a ticket. Now, that's only a few words, and it sounds very simple. But, historically, if I go and buy a pair of shoes and they're $100 and there's 5% tax, so the ticket's $105, the merchant gets charged for the $105, and that $105 transaction gets processed. What this law is saying is you got to peel them apart and treat them differently, which again sounds simple, but in a national interconnected network that's built up the way it has been, it's not wired like that. So it's actually incredibly incredibly complicated, and there's tons of of complexities that follow. What happens with returns? What happens with purchases that are made out of state and state? As a general matter, this is not aimed at business, right? They're when they passed it, they were thinking about those shoes that I was buying. But like any business transaction, if I, as a business owner, buying supplies for my copier, I pay tax on that. So that's going to apply to my business payment system. And again, the complexity of it is something that wasn't thought through at all, much less is it going to affect transactions that really weren't top of mind for policy.
I see.
It also puts limits on what payment transaction data can be used, and says it can only be used with respect to that transaction. But of course, across the payments ecosystem, we use data for things like fighting fraud. And it's critical. And so that's just an example of something not aimed at business payments, but something that could affect in a really negative way.
Sure, and there's probably there's something like that in every state in the union, most likely. I'm guessing.
There are, yeah.
Moving on, since 2020, we've seen massive growth in business payments, as you've been saying, and the tech to make business payments fast and secure. Still, challenges remain keeping growth on par with the pandemic transformation, which was hot and heavy for a few years. It slowed down a little maybe now. In your view, Jodie, what are some of the big challenges we face in business payments specifically moving forward? I know that you have concerns about bad policy, so it's just sort of doubling down on some of the things you were just saying. What is there an area of business policy? It could be cross-border payments. It could be something like that concerns you specifically.
Yeah, look, I'll flag a few things, including cross-border. Kind of to circle back to AI quickly. Look, AI as a tool will be leveraged across the payments ecosystem. It already is, right? We use machine learning as an ecosystem to fight fraud. You want to make sure, and have done that for decades. As an aside, policymakers are highly engaged. We want to make sure that they understand how we're using this technology and don't get in the way. And it's critical, as I'm, sure you know better than I do, on the business payment side, accounts payable managers say 76% of them have experienced some payments fraud. So it's something our industry is constantly battling, and we need to be able to use every tool we have. And you don't want, again, policymakers to get in the way unintentionally. Cross-border is another example. There it is a cumbersome process. It is challenging. Part of that is a big part of that actually is the regulatory framework. There is not consistency on both sides of these transactions about the regulatory framework, and something that could be made much more streamlined is still incredibly complex and cumbersome and slow. So another great example, actually, where the regulatory framework, the policy framework, is affecting the way that payments generally and business payments in particular can happen.
As we get ready to close out, I'm just curious, tell me a little bit more about how the Electronic Transactions Association represents B2B payment interests in those boardrooms that I talked about and on the Hill. Give us a peek into the halls of power, and what kinds of questions are they asking of you as the payment subject matter expert in their marbled halls?
Yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about that, and then I think what's important for your listeners to understand is, this is important for your business. So as we and others, right, work hard to make sure that the policy framework is right. We're working hard to ensure that we understand where payments is going, including business payments, and education. Right? We really need to be in there explaining how business payments work, about the way in which data is used, about the way in which, we work to ensure security, about the direction that it's headed. This industry has such a great story to tell. We are, like I said, we are quiet in a sense because it works well. Consumers and businesses count on us, and we deliver every day. And I think just making sure that story gets out there. We literally underpin the economy, this industry. And making sure people understand the degree to which we do that and just how well we do it, I think is the most important thing all of us can do.
And that includes lawmakers. Certainly.
That particularly includes lawmakers, yes.
Got it. Fantastic. Well, an insider's view of what to expect on the policy side of payments in the coming year. I'm very grateful to our guest, Jodie Kelley, CEO of the Electronic Transactions Association. Jodie, thanks so much for being with us on the Payments Podcast. To our audience, thank you for taking the time for listening to today's episode. Catch us next time on your favorite podcast platform, such as Spotify, SoundCloud, and Apple. Bye now.